last week, Trump's special envoy to Middle East, Steve Witkoff, had a plan to move Palestinians to Indonesia. We've talked about it. I think that didn't really go anyway. It sort of fell apart pretty, or people stopped talking about it pretty fast. But now Trump himself has basically suggested of relocating the Palestinians to neighboring countries, mainly Egypt and Jordan. When I first heard about it, I thought it was similar to the Indonesian plan, which I believe was supposed to be temporary, basically move them out for a bit, see what Israel can do in Gaza when it comes to Hamas, and then get them back. But the way my understanding of this plan right now is that it's supposed to be more of a permanent solution, basically move them out. I haven't seen I haven't seen yet numbers anywhere if it's supposed to be part of the Palestinians or the whole population. So we'll talk about the potential specifics of the plans, where it might go, and also, is this something Israel, or in a sense America, since it's coming for Trump, that America should try to pursue and Israel should try to work with? I believe Trump is supposed to meet with Netanyahu but hasn't yet, so we'll hear more about it, but I think it's really interesting to talk about it already. Joining me today is Marco Richard and also Yar Reichel, I believe it's pronounced, joining us from Israel. He has been actually on the channel in the past, where we've talked about the um, uh, Israel's politics. Did I say Ireland earlier? Because we just talked about Ireland. I'm not sure if I misspoke. Uh, he used to work in Israeli parliament as an assistant, and he currently works for Ayn Rand Centered Israel, as well as he has an upcoming book called Victory Now, which lays out the moral and practical grounds for how to basically deal with the situation right now, which I think makes for a really good guest, especially on this episode, since we are getting sort of a plan. At least, we're finally getting some plan, not from Netanyahu himself, but at least from Trump, some possible future what might happen here. So I'll go to ER immediately and ask you, what do you think about this plan from Trump? And also, is it anything close to what sort of you had in mind in your own book?
All right, so I have 3 points regarding this plan. The first point is I don't think it will actually happen. And let me base the grounds on why. When I look at Trump, he has a very unique negotiation strategy. So usually when people negotiate, they want to trade value for value. Trump negotiation strategy is creating a negative value and then negotiating the removal of the negative value. Basically, negotiation in some sort of quote unquote extortion. So, by making a plan to supposedly relocate Palestinians from Gaza to Egypt and Jordan, he creating a negative value for Egypt and Jordan. They have to politically fight this initiation. Obviously, they don't want it. They hate the Palestinians. Everywhere the Palestinians went to, there's been trouble. The most substantial examples are Jordan, which had the uprising and the events in the 1970s, Tunisia, Lebanon, obviously Gaza and Judea and Samaria and the affairs with Israel. Every time you do any interactions with the Palestinians, you're going to get trouble, and the Egyptians and the Jordanians know that they don't want to get any Gazans, and it will be great trouble from them. It will create a president they don't wanna have. And by doing so, he's basically Trump probably wants them, to rebuild Gaza, to bring funds there, to do whatever. So he's going to start the negotiation with you need to get some Palestinians, like a few hundreds of thousands of Palestinians, and then it's going to bring them down to like help Gaza reconstruct or allocate funds or whatever. So this is my point on Trump's plan. I think now regarding transfer, I think transfer is a good option. I wouldn't like Palestinians to be transferred to countries that are neighboring to Israel due to the problem I've described. I think Palestinians transferred to Egypt could cause an uprising in Egypt, a coup d'etat. Maybe they'll join the Muslim Brotherhood. or whatever movements, and basically Palestinians is Arabs that are members of the Palestinian political movement. That's how I see it, which is a movement to destroy Israel. And wherever they go, this is what they do. It's a very nihilistic movement. They have no value for their own life. It's only about destruction. So this is the cause of the trouble. Now, let's say I preferred the plan to move them to Indonesia, maybe places in Southern Africa as well, which is way further away than Israel. So even if they'll make an uprising there, it will be less of a threat to Israel. Okay, so this was my second point. My last point is that our hierarchy of the steps we want to make, or the order of them, is wrong. And this is a thing I also address in my book. The first thing we gotta have is a total victory over Gaza, even before the transfer. Because let's say we go for the transfer, there is not yet a victory, which means Hamas is still a functioning entity ruling Gaza, in fact. That means that they will not allow the Palestinians to exit Gaza. They will either kill them or prevent it from them, and then what will we do? We'll have another pressure to once again negotiate with Gaza, basically with the ruling entity, Hamas or whatever. So basically, the first thing we gotta do is to make the ruling authority in Gaza, whoever rules there, whether it's Hamas or the joint operation room between all the organizations, Jihadic Islam, the Democratic Front, which are the communist organization, the Popular Front, which is the other communist organization. They have all kind of branches there, all united in their task to destroy Israel. So they need to surrender, and once they surrender, we can do what I call a proper occupation. And when I say a proper occupation, I mean occupation like the post-World War II occupation, where the Allies took control over the territory. They had trials of the leaders, death penalties, denazification, and then control that includes, turn it into a peaceful territory that includes re-education, deportation, persecution. And this will be the time to also talk about transfer as a viable option. But as of now, this is all, we're dreaming here in La La Land. And I can talk about it, elaborate about it later, because I have more things to say, but this is already going out of the context of the initiation. So let me know later when I'll be able to continue about the situation in Israel in more detail.
Yeah, we can. You provided a pretty good overview, so we can sort of hammer down on each point a bit more. Just I'll go to you, Marco, but yeah, something that I've been afraid of when it comes to this war the most is the fact, or is the way it has been conducted. I think we had an episode, maybe even in 2023, where we discussed the book Embracing Defeat, which was a book written about Japanese or the U.S. occupation of Japan after the Second World War, and how much it took both during the war, basically the way you conduct the war, and how much it impacted the actual occupation, and how much that sort of was required to basically completely, in a sense, I don't know if you want to use the term de-radicalize or sort of de-extremify the sort of population so they can accept, let's say, a bit more Western values, or, we can have them embracing the American culture afterwards. And but let's go, maybe stick a little bit more with the sort of, let's say, the practical aspects of it, or sort of, can they happen? I mean, Marco, when did you hear about this plan first, and sort of, yeah, do you think something like this is possible? I think we've already seen, I'm not sure if I have a specific quote, but basically we've already seen the both Egyptian and Jordanian leaders, as well as any other Arab leaders that were asked, pretty much straight up said, no, we don't want to handle any of this. What do you think this stands for?
Well, first of all, let's not forget that Gaza was Egyptian, but the Egyptian didn't want it after the Six Days War in '67. They didn't want them because the Gazans are renowned troublemakers. That's why the countries around Israel do not want them. That's why they are kind of stuck in limbo because of the situation that they themselves created. When I first heard the Indonesia thing, I just thought it was some kind of, as Yao pointed out, some kind of negotiation standpoint. And to hear this new proposal, I mean, this is just bollocks, really. I mean, the problem is the relocation of Palestinians. It shouldn't be even on the card. The problem is not where they are, but the problem is that they are. And the issue is that you should get rid of the ideology that motivates them, that makes them commit the kind of atrocities that they committed in October 7, because it doesn't matter where they're going to be. If they're still fueled by this kind of Islamic craziness, racist hate for Israel, it doesn't matter where they are. We end up exporting Islamic terrorism in adjacent countries or wherever. I mean, we see what Palestinian supporters can do, just collecting funds here in the West, organizing protests and all this kind of stuff, and finally fund back into Gaza. So the issue is not where they are, but the issue is that we shouldn't have a Palestinian entity, in the sense of the kind of ideology that motivates these people to murder, massacre, and kidnap people in Israel shouldn't be even an issue. Practically, first of all, it's a voluntary scheme, so you can imagine the enemies of civilization will never go along with this. They will stay in Gaza unless a huge amount of money is dwindled in front of their faces. And the fact that you can actually have a military occupation of Gaza. Now you go rid of UNRWA. You can re-educate these people. It's going to take a generation, but you can re-educate them and forge people who are not hell-bent into destroying Israel just because of a religious and racist motivation.
Yeah, I think to call this a plan is to oversell it in the first place, because it's a glimmer of an idea of a plan at best, isn't it? And of course, that fits squarely, of course, within the Trump MO of shooting from the hip and blundering in and sticking your foot in it and just making it up as you go along. However, this isn't the first time such a plan has been mooted either, and this that in itself doesn't necessarily make it a poor goal ultimately, and to some extent a practical mechanism. But at the same time, there's got lots of issues with it. And I certainly agree with ER's point about negative value and essentially using a threat that you then withdraw in order as a negotiating ploy. I think the problem is that we've seen that Hamas is not defeated. We've seen that with the horrendous, evil circus of the handover ceremonies that you see each time the hostages are released. That is not a defeated enemy. That is an enemy on the stage making a stand every time and revealing itself to be as wedded to its ideology as it was some 15 months ago. And then on the other side of it, you've also got the fact that I think the Palestinians themselves always have, when plans are spoken about the land they live in or where they live, their volition is always extracted from them entirely, as if they should simply be told and given some really good instructions from someone else as to where to live and how to behave, and zero is required of them to make it work. And of course, that is, utterly untrue. And we've got to recognize the fact that the disengagement back in 2005 gave them an opportunity within this very territory to build the kind of place that they could have had, a prosperous existence in, but they chose to spend the money digging tunnels, funding Hamas, funding the terrorist organization network, and firing rockets on Israel continually, and they chose not to. So unless they're in a different place now, mentally, ideologically, morally, and in a morale sense as well, then what is going to change? And simply relocating them to somewhere else, as Marco said, is not going to alter the situation. And then the last point I just want to throw in there into the mix is the other Arab countries. And of course, they always want to wash their hands of the Gaza Strip, because in that way, it's always Israel's responsibility and Israel's fault. whatever happens. And of course, that again plays into the fact that the Palestinians, through this way of looking at things, have no volition and no capability of determining their own thoughts, which is nonsense for any human.
Sorry, can I just add something about the negative value? I mean, that's a good observation. The only problem is, how do you deal with somebody who worships death? What kind of offer can you make them? They don't care about living in a peaceful environment, so all they understand is threat. And you've seen, as soon as they were threatened by Trump before he even became president, that forced them to come into negotiation with the current hostage, although the negotiation should have happened in the first place, but it's a different issue. So yes, you can only threat these people because they don't value anything else but death.
Yeah. So with Trump, the negotiation by threat is directed at Egypt and Jordan. As I said, the way to force the Palestinians into relocating is in my view, it's only after total defeat. Otherwise, it will be some sort of a horrible deal, maybe even worse than what we're having now. But I want to touch on your point and say this. So, of course, we are living in a civilized Western world, and in such, once we have different opinions, disagreement, we discuss it, and we voluntarily convince each other, right? Now, once we go into the kingdom of violence, this is completely different. Israel is obviously not in the state of, it's time to discuss with the Palestinians and have a peaceful argument. We're way beyond that due to the behavior of the Palestinians. Since 93, where we withdrawal of Gaza, in the first time, it was a partial withdrawal. Then in 2005, when we completely withdrawed and Hamas was elected to have a co-government with PLO. And then in 2007, Hamas took complete power over Gaza. And even beforehand, there has been complete and total disaster of them just attacking us over and over again. A long time ago, we were not in the place of convincing the Palestinians of anything. This is now a matter of having the Palestinians to agree with us and do for us being in a war of self-defense, killing those who do not agree and bear arms or support those who bear arms in one way or another. This is the state of affairs. The Israelis do not understand that. The Israelis, I want to shout out to a beautiful paper, article by Ayn Rand. It's called The Argument from Intimidation. And I recommend everybody to revisit this article. And of course, if you've never read it, it's a great time to read it. And basically what she says, it's a unique case of ad hominem. Quite different, actually. It's about a threat for somebody who holds a rational opinion to evade it immediately. Otherwise, he will be deemed as immoral. And the reason I mention it, because this is basically the epitome of what is going on in Israel right now regarding Hamas and the hostages in Gaza. Basically, everybody, like the mainstream voice is, we gotta have this deal. We gotta get the hostages back at every price. And if you're against this current deal, you basically don't want the hostage back, and you are evil. And the subtext is, you must cooperate with our surrender to Hamas, or you will be deemed immoral. This is completely absurd. This is an evil premise. Now, let me clarify that. Getting the hostages back is an extremely important target and goal. We gotta get those people back. They are innocent Israelis. The Israeli government and the Israeli people as a whole failed them. The most basic commitment, obligation of a state for its citizens is to protect them from violence and coercion. And they were took from their homes by a foreign entity, and they're being held by one of the most evil entities in the world, and we gotta get them back. But the goal does not justify the means. And getting a proper goal with the most evil means is a very immoral thing, even though you get partially the goal at the end. And this deal is partially an indication for the reason why I'm working on this book, Victory Now, because we have to convince the Israelis that there is only one moral and practical solution, and this is total war over Gaza. And our focus as Israelis should be minimizing the harm for Israelis. Because as of now, we are sacrificing Israeli soldiers for Palestinians, for Gazans. And we are sacrificing Israeli soldiers and Israeli civilians for what people call a deal. This is not a deal. This is surrender to blackmail. Is a surrender to people who are blackmailing you. You cannot. This is not a deal. This is ransom. But the people in Israel, and listen, they've been through a lot. They are now in a state of, as I said, just we gotta get this deal. This is the moral thing to do. And I think the problem is that Israelis hold a wrong standard for morality. And I think the key to it is particularly human rights. And Israelis either explicitly or implicitly see human rights as something, I will say, intrinsic, which means we gotta respect people's rights no matter what, and everybody is worthy of those rights. And what I'm doing in the book, I'm demonstrating that rights is a human principle. And once a political entity supported by its people denies such concept to its people and to its neighbors. You know Gaza? They throw gay people off the roofs, they throw political opponents off the roof. All of the political entities, they are only about death and destruction and nihilism. There is nothing in Gaza remotely related to the wish for respecting any human rights. Whatever they claim is bullshit, of course, pardon my French. And Israeli is a state that is committed to individual rights and liberties. At least in comparison to Gaza, way different story here. And once such a horrible nation attacks Israel, Israel has a moral obligation to completely destroy this entity with minimal harm to its people, and the Israelis don't understand that. This is the whole point of my book. This is basically, my book is stating this moral case explicitly and comprehensively, showing a plan on how to do it, what do we need to do in practice, laying a siege, how to deal with the hostages, how to deal with the surrender, how to deal with the pressure, how to deal with international law, and what's the meaning of it, and showing that is not only moral but practical. And if this book will make it and become popular, there might even be a change in what people demand in Israel right now. Because as of now, the arguments I've just, laid in front of you in short, I'm sure you will be way more understanding due to you interested in Ayn Rand and her ideas. It's completely misunderstood in Israel. Mostly what I see today, as I said, is cases of argument, of intimidation. There is no rational discussion, at least not in the mainstream. It's very emotional. The focus is in the wrong place, and we are paying a price in blood. We are sacrificing our innocent people. We are sacrificing our heroes that went to battle to protect the state from the most ugliest evil scums there exist. That, by the way, Israelis are the one who allowed them to become as such, but that's a different story. And the price is too high, and I don't think the state can survive any more of this snowball going downhill since the 90s, in the case of the relationship between the Israelis and those who call themselves Palestinians.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to whenever you want to deal with a problem, well, first you have to recognize there is a problem, and you have to properly identify what the problem is. And my biggest problem when it came to the Western leaders or the international organizations, or I have a few quotes even from Trump I want to cover. When it comes to sort of looking at what is really going on in Gaza and what is the problem, everybody misses the picture. And I'll read the Trump quotes just to build it on it. First one was, I'd like to get them living in an area where they can live without disruption and revolution and violence. When you look at the Gaza Strip, it's been hell for so many years. There have been various civilizations on that strip. It didn't start here, it started thousands of years before, and there's always been violence associated with it. You could get people living in the areas that are a lot safer and maybe a lot better and maybe a lot more comfortable. And so now already there is this complete separation of the ideas and the people. Basically, like, saying there's always been violence in this region. There's always been violence in Europe until we discovered the purpose of rights, the need for civilization, and how to get out of this constant state of violence. That can happen everywhere. And then there is also this idea of that Hamas or that violence or October 7 was imposed on Palestinian population. That basically, Hamas just came in, took over, Palestinians cannot do anything about it, and now we have to sort of deal with Hamas as some sort of occupying power, as some sort of like bank robbers that have taken hostages, and we have to deal with the bank robbers while taking care of the hostages. And by hostages, I don't mean the Israeli hostages, but all of Palestinian people, as if they don't hold the responsibility of what they've elected, of what they support, of what they've celebrated on October 7. And when you have this sort of view, and this is pretty much like unitary view of this conflict in the West. Like, here we see even Trump. Everybody believes that Palestinians are basically innocent for the most part, and that Hamas only is the problem. And I mean, just I mean, to go to you, Marco, now maybe. Yeah, how do we really get out of this situation? I mean, the fact is that people do look at it like this, that only if we get rid of Hamas. I mean, we just covered the Irish president, his speech he had 2 days ago, sort of as a for the Holocaust Remembrance Day, where he talked about the sadness that both Israelis and Palestinians have to, are dealing with because of what happened on October 7. I mean, how do you deal with it? How can you ever like solve this situation, solve this conflict, when you look at Palestinians as they do not actually have to do anything with the conflict? They are just, victims of Hamas.
Yes, and of course we've seen the scene in the mainstream media of these columns of people walking with chattels on their back, and we're supposed to feel sorry for them. Are we? These are the very people who went into Israel, murdered over 1,000 people, butchered over 1,000 people, and took back 251 hostages, some of whom are still held there, by the very same people we're supposed to feel sorry about. And to be honest, it's not a surprise, because I remember after 9/11, I was flabbergasted by the reaction of our leaders. Everybody scrambled out to say, oh, it's not Islam's fault, there's nothing to do with Islam, religious peace, and all this kind of bullshit that we've been gaslit about. Now, if we don't recognize who your enemy is, there's no war, there's no battle, there's no even point thinking about fighting anything, because you don't know who you're fighting for, or you're fighting against, or you're fighting why. We are not even clear why our system, capitalist system, is the best system out there. People don't understand. People just think it's about money, it's about production. No, it's about freedom. The capitalist freedom is the only one who answers the question, what is man? Should man be free to act for his own interest, or should he be a slave or under the yoke of whether another population, a race, or a god? And capitalism is the one that says, no, man should be free. And nothing else allows for the freedom of the individual, which is something that kind of occurs in the West and kind of occurs in Israel. Nowhere else you can argue in the Muslim world there is any degree of freedom as much as in Israel and certainly the Western world. So the first thing you have to do is recognize who your enemy is and call it out, and to try to appease or come up with peaceful solution that look good on paper, and it doesn't involve too much fighting. It's actually going against your interest and going against the future interest of future generations. By appeasing, by paying the ransom, as Yar pointed out, all you do, you make sure that in the future there's going to be more and more hostages, because Palestinians, the savage that they are, understand very well that hostages become currency. They can get something in exchange for hostages. And taking hostages is quite easy, especially if you don't defend yourself. If you're too afraid of calling them out, if you're too afraid of striking back every time you're attacked. And on the specific case of Gaza, from the US administration, it's good that there is some kind of recognition that you cannot move on with the status quo. You cannot move on with the two-state solution, effectively. That seems to be, I don't know whether there's anyone with enough brain power to work this one out, but this is definitely what they're pointing out. They're effectively saying there is no solution with a two-state solution, because, again, the Palestinians are only hell-bent into destroying Israel. So that's a two-state solution has to go out of the window in the first place. And then, again, when you have the situation when you're attacked, Israel should, I realize, as you mentioned, it's a very, very emotional situation when you have hostages and family involved. And of course, anyone would do everything they can to get their beloved people back. But you have to understand, and Israel have this kind of weird, it's not weird as such, but it's a very self-destructive policy of leaving nobody behind. Well, when the savages come into Israel and kidnap people, you should consider them as casualties of war. If you can get them back, good. But the first option would be to flatten, to destroy, to remove totally the threat that caused the situation in the first place. Once you do that, these people will understand that going into Israel and killing people and kidnapping people is a no-go in the first place, because you will know what the response is. But not doing that, not flattening, not destroying the whole of Gaza within a few hours of their murderous attack is a mistake. And every time there is a ceasefire, and every time there is a release of terrorists, and every time Hamas or the Palestinians win, thanks to the horrific action that they take, they always get away with it. They've learned it. It's been like that for 80 years. They know that after a few bombings, they will come back. They will have time to recover, and they will start. And as they promised, they will do it over and over and over again.
I have something to say about that.
Go ahead, please.
I want to give an example. There was an operation on June 8th, 2024. It's called Arnon Operation, named after a soldier who died in this operation. And in this operation, Israel, with the IDF and Shin Bet, has rescued 4 hostages: Noar Gomani, Almog Meirjan, Andrei Kozalov, and Shlomi Ziv. During the operation, it's been a complete, Hollywood top extreme special ops operation you can imagine. And the vehicle that were supposed to get the hostages out of there from the apartment to the helicopter was stuck. And they had to get a replacement vehicle. It malfunctioned as well. Eventually, they managed to get them out. During this time, the Palestinians opened fire at them. Only for this reason, they have received artillery coverage and fire that eventually killed 100 Palestinians. Eventually, we had only 1 casualties, and the 4 hostages were rescued safe and sound. Yet, there was controversy after the operation due to 100 Palestinians dying in this operation, due to them attacking the rescuers. That's A. And B, let me tell you that I'm certain that during the planning stage, if it was known that such thing would be a part of the operation, it would not have been approved. Just to give you an image of how bad the case is. Now, the same people who are outraged that 100 Palestinians have died are the same people saying we must have a deal. So they are okay with us surrendering to Hamas. They're okay with us releasing terrorists that will bring moral, moral support to our enemies to kill us furthermore, and will arrange those terror attacks or take part of them or whatever. They're fine with that. They're fine with us denying and betraying our principle and betraying justice or adopting some sort of bad, deluded principles that will undermine our survival. But they're not okay with us fighting the enemy and rescuing our people because some of the people who are basically enforcing our enemy might die in the process.
Yeah, absolutely. And that rescue operation you talk about there involved the four hostages that were kept in the homes of a medic and a journalist. And of course, the same people who say you shouldn't, attack hospitals, or they don't recognize that just because somebody's wearing a press vest doesn't mean that they're not a member of Hamas or a supportive Palestinian of Hamas who is also keeping a hostage in their own home. So yeah, all of that morality is exposed, and of course, it's the morality of people back in the West taking exactly the stance you're talking about, criticizing Israel for the 100 deaths you're talking about, and the attitude towards rescuing hostages is the same for who's holding them in the first place, and making this phony distinction between Palestinians and Hamas in the first place. I totally agree. I mean, earlier you were talking about how Israel's got the wrong standard of morality. And of course, obviously, I agree with that, absolutely. And that is the point that needs making, because where you've got a chink within a society where you've got a hope of extracting some rationality, getting people to think rationally and recognize the flaw in that morality, you've got a chance of correcting it. But of course, we also ought to emphasize at the same time that, of course, Arab society has a wrong standard of morality as well, doesn't it? It's a much higher mountain to climb.
Oh, it's a complete difference. There is a difference. Listen, Israelis are a life-loving people. Okay, like this is a very deep principle in Jewish culture, and it's a very deep principle in Israeli culture. We are people who are love to live, love to flourish, to do things for our own, and we are a nation that respects individual rights. The Arabs around us, whether it's the Palestinian movement or other movements, there is a deep sense of nihilism, and the concrete name for it is jihad. So I wouldn't say concrete, but like the more localized version of this the big nihilism talk about is jihad, and it's about destroying value. It's about hatred for the good for being good. It's about explicitly going against life on this earth for the promise of a different afterlife, as long as you did enough destruction to those who think different than you. So it's a completely different planet. And yes, Israelis are life-loving, and they have an error of defining what it means in some areas. So when you are dealing with such nihilism, there is an attempt to judge them as if they are as life-loving as us. There is an attempt to say, well, okay, here's the case. The Jewish people has been through the Holocaust 3 generations ago. And this is a tremendous personal trauma for many of the people in Israel. My grandfather had his whole family murdered, and he lived in the forest, and horrible, horrible stories. And he got out of it and built himself and became a doctor after long and extremely hard work and studying together, and managed to move to Israel, escape from the Soviet Union, and got to Israel in the late 50s and build a life here with this trauma that later on, you know, my father was raised by him and I was raised by my father. It all goes in the family. And many families are as such, and many others are not, you know, they know about those stories. And why am I telling this? Because this trauma made the Israeli learn the following lesson, which is don't be an occupier, don't make people suffer, don't make people go what we've been through, etc., etc. And there is a problem with this lesson because it makes you avoid the true standard of morality. You cannot secure the lives of those who want to destroy you. But this is again goes to the argument from intimidation. You don't want to be deemed as immoral. So we gave the Palestinians, you know, some of Judea and Samaria and some of Gaza in the 90s. It didn't work. Okay, we got to give up a little bit more. We can't be those Nazis. We're going to give them Gaza, gave them 2005. Completely withdrawal. We got Jews out of their homes, evicted Jews out of their home. We evicted the cemeteries. Why did we took off the bodies in the cemeteries? Why didn't we allow no one to stay? Because we knew what will happen to any Jew that will be remained in Gaza after the Israeli army would leave it. And we're seeing right now Jews staying in Gaza right now. You know, it's I don't even want to speak about it in, you know, a poetic way because it's actually happening right now. Yet what I'm trying to say is that the lesson we should have learned is that the right to live, you have it until you forfeit it. And the way to forfeit your right for life is trying to take other people's life. And this is what the Palestinian political movement is doing. And everybody in Gaza giving moral sanction to the government and not cooperating with Israel or surrendering or trying to force it to surrender is an enemy. That currently our only way for us to deal with them is to force them to give up this idea by force. And the Israelis just cannot understand it due to the tremendous psychological pressure they have been under 70 years ago and they are under as of now. And this is a nation dealing with trauma. And you gotta have this in mind when you think about the situation, when you see what Israelis are doing and what decisions they make. And sometimes decisions are being made that I'm telling myself this is a catastrophe. Many innocent people are gonna die in the future because of those decisions.
Yeah.
I didn't imagine October 7th. You know, after the Shalit deal in 2011, I understood that a lot of bloodshed is gonna come from it. I didn't think it would be this bad. And now I can't even imagine the catastrophe we might be facing in the future.
Yeah, I mean, since we are talking about it, and yesterday was the uh, Holocaust Remembrance Day. Sorry, completely. Because you know, when it comes to the town I live in, or the town that is close to me, was one of the biggest Jewish communities in the past in Eastern Slovakia specifically, and 50% of the population was Jewish. And you know, we have sort of like a memorial place next to what used to be a synagogue. Now, of course, it's not being used since there is not a single Jew now living in town. And it's you know, for those people who maybe are not from Europe and have never visited like a museum, it's really like a jarring uh you know, place to visit. Sort of the fact that there were certain people living here and that something happened and now they are all gone. And you know, now that the fact that that is now being used against the Jews, I mean, we discussed Ireland recently, and Ireland itself, the Parliament of Ireland, I think, basically passed, I don't know, like a memorandum or whatever, declaring that Israel is a state committing genocide against the Palestinians or in Gaza. And yeah, I mean, the situation we are in, um, it really requires both. That's why I think, you are talking about your book. That's why I think really it is important for something like this to come out, because s- Israel is standing against the world, is standing against both the savage world of the Middle East as well as the so-called civilized world of the West, which has given up on the idea that war is necessary to defend civilization the when there is a population that doesn't want anything else besides destroying you, doesn't want anything else besides a destruction of West, a destruction of civilization. There is no way to find a compromise with that. There is no way to find, negotiate something. When the other side wants to kill you, there is no negotiation you can have there. Negotiation can only happen when two sides accept some underlying premise, accept some underlying agreement that neither side will violate. But there is no such thing when it comes to the Palestinians. They want Israel to be gone, which is now it's Israel because it's the closest one, but it's complete hatred of Western civilization. That's why when Israel has disengaged, they destroyed everything left by the Israelis. There was no desire to develop Gaza. There was no desire to have a thriving society. It was all used to attack Jews. And so I guess, well, Ayar, you wanted to bring up something earlier in the show. There is one thing I sort of wanted to discuss in relation to that, to what I just talked about, is there's increasing move for, something we had before October 7 was normalizing with Saudi Arabia, normalizing relations with Saudi Arabia. Now it's being, I think Netanyahu always, when he had the US speech, he talked about it. There are some possible talks about, again, possible normalization, as well as when it came to this plan, there was a lot of talk about will the Arab nations sort of agree with that. But IR, what do you think about this whole idea of normalizing relations with like Middle Eastern states? From the sort of view of Israel, or why is specifically Netanyahu seems to really like to pursue that kind of diplomacy?
Well, in a diplomatic sense, a state that want to have relations with as many states as possible to have more leverage and to have more influence and power, I can see this interest. Yet, I have not understood myself. I have not come to a conclusion whether this is good or bad. And the reason is, once again, the issue of moral sanction. The most basic premise is that good cannot give moral sanction to evil. This is a very, of course, a very strong premise in objectivism, and it's been explicitly gone over in Atlas Shrugged, and I completely agree with that. And this is also the issue with the way the Western world see war, and the way the Western world see dealing with the most savage of enemies. They see their rights as intrinsic. They see they have the rights no matter what. We gotta take care of them. It's our duty. And basically, by helping the supposed helpless that got there because of their evil, we are giving moral sanction to evil. And in this point of view, the normalization with Saudi Arabia, sorry, is not a good thing. And here is maybe a more basic point that I would address this. I think the Western world, Israel in particular, and the whole Western world, the only solution for all of those issues is the Western world needs to come with a demand for a reform in Islam. And there should be a reform with Islam. Islam should neglect jihad, and it should neglect coercion, and Islam should become a religion that gives up the idea of conquering the world and conquering its own people. This idea is unacceptable. There is a difference between a religion that says let's pray and let's have our costumes and do whatever, that's okay. They have complete right to do it. But when a political movement support coercions and the denial of rights and a nihilistic attempt to destroy others, those others that are to be destroyed, they have a right to stop it. And this is way deeper than freedom of religion. Yes, people have freedom of religion. You don't have freedom of trying to destroy the world. And you cannot give moral justification for this political attempt to destroy the world because it is promoted by a religion. But this is what the world is doing. Basically, it's two very evil ideas. One is that everybody deserves right regardless of their choices and actions, which means like somebody can do the most horrible thing and you must still provide him rights. And two is that everything that's covered as a religion, every idea that has a religious base is protected, including the most evil and horrible and vile and deadly ideas. And this underlines the relationship of Israel with whatever Arab Muslim country, and it's also relevant for the entire world. And what we see right now in Europe, the grooming gangs in Britain, and the terror attacks, and the vehicle rampages in Germany. This is a manifestation of the problem I described, these people denying reality and giving moral sanction to evil under the argument of freedom of religion. This is completely absurd, and people are afraid. People are afraid to explicitly say it's time to demand a reform in Islam. They are afraid to be called racist, Islamophobic. They are afraid to be targeted by Muslims. And this state is leading us to a position where the reality will be so horrible that the other side of the collective statist spectrum will rise, and we might see the return of concentration camps in Europe. Instead of demanding the change, it will be just like a persecution of ethnical or religious rate, regardless of ideas and choices. Because, the pendulum will shift to the other side. So this is very gloomy future I see, unless people will adopt the ideas. And once again, this takes me to my book, and I want to give a shout out for myself here and call people to visit my website. It's victory.now, www.victory.now. And it has, you can sign up for the waiting list for the book that will come in English and in Hebrew as well. If you're Hebrew speaking, I'd recommend. And also there is a link to our first op-ed that just released, and it's regarding the latest so-called deal we've had with Hamas. So I'm very much recommending you to visit victory.now and check it out and sign up.
Yeah, people can check out both. It's gonna be in the chat as well as in the description if you watch it after we go live. And since we are running out of time, I'll go to you, Marco, in a bit. But I just want to mention something. That's why, and yeah, you mentioned it, Islamophobia specifically. I think that's a really destructive concept when it comes to sort of recognizing what is the real problem with Islam. Because again, we don't give it to we don't call any other concept that. We don't call it, it's anti-Semitism, meaning irrational hatred towards Jews. It's not irrational hatred towards Judaism. We call it xenophobia. We don't call it like irrational hatred of like color itself or something like that. We call it specifically hating people because they have a relation to that. But by calling it Islamophobia, you are trying to say that any sort of hate towards Islam, any sort of hate towards the ideas of Islam or anything are inherently irrational, are inherently packaged together. I think it really is a package deal. Are packaged together with stuff. Yeah, people can have irrational hatred towards. They see a brown person, they see a turban, they see maybe even burqa, and automatically like have a hatred towards such person. And they're trying to put that together with the actual problems that Islam might have. As we've said, like the fact there are still things happening that are specifically connected to Islam, it should be sort of recognized. And when we refuse to recognize the problem, as I mentioned earlier, we cannot fight it. But Marco, any last thoughts on this, and where can people find you?
Yeah, I mean, the problem is against the ideology that comes with Islam, not Islam itself. I mean, the Catholic Church was in the same situation 400 years ago. If they were behaving now the way they're behaving back then, well, I would have a problem with them as well. The issue here is that bad ideas, wherever they are, once they act, because bad ideas lead to bad actions. Once they interfere with somebody else's right, with another individual's freedom, well, that's where the problem rises. But if you choose to, worship a ghost, well, it's up to you. It's not going to make you happy in the long term, but it's up to you. Just, stay in your box and don't hurt anybody else. And of course, as I mentioned, bad ideas are out there, and bad ideas can only be fought with better idea. And thankfully, we have better ideas. I mean, Ayn Rand has been writing stuff 70, 80 years ago. And her ideas, based on the philosophy of Aristotle largely, from 2,300 years ago, are available to anyone. So there are good ideas out there. It's just a matter of stop following the bad ideas, stop falling for the false choice that you can only fight the bad guy, because you can actually join the good guys. You can be a good guy, and you can make a good life for yourself by choosing to make life your own priority, by applying a good philosophy and by using the good ideas out there.
And also to stop erasing the responsibility for those bad ideas. And the fact that Gaza is in rubble is because of those bad ideas. And should Gazans really be rewarded with a rebuilt Gaza on the basis of what they did 15 months ago and have not recognized the evil that was and have not changed as a result? I mean, I think a lot of this particular plan we've been talking about has been, a lot of it I've heard described as Trump testing a regional taboo, that the Palestinians should be moved out of the area, either temporarily or permanently or whatever, to neighboring regions. But the real taboo is within Western cultures, and it's within a lot of the Arab world itself, and it's calling out Islam exactly in the way that you just said. It's the taboo of calling it out. Its need to change. Its need to reject jihad, and its need to reject the evil that's within it that is causing so much death and destruction. And for all of the emphasis that's on Israel, a lot of that is missed from the focus that should be, deliberately missed in many cases, because a lot of the academia and the media in the West don't want anyone other than Israel to be the cause. That's the anti-Semitism built in to the argument that they have all the time. So that's at the crux of this. So yeah, it's and of course, ultimately, this point about the Gazans are just in an area that, because of geography, because of the fact that it's been like that for years, means it'll always be an area of violence and destruction. Well, that's just to treat those violence and destruction as floating abstractions that don't bear any relation to the actions and activities of the people who perpetrate them. And this is the situation that's brought us to where we are now. So yeah, and in terms of where you can find us, please check out the Briefly Objective and subscribe to it. It's a sister channel. The details are in the description below, where you find short form material based on these chats on these programs on this channel.
And Yar, any last thoughts?
Just want to clarify to the end, just the people in Gaza and the people in Judea and Samaria, the Arabs, again, I have a problem with the name Palestinians because it's like calling the British people laborist. It's a political movement of people of Arab descent. They give sanction to Hamas. They are the one who bear the responsibility of Hamas being in power, and the evidence is that there are a lot of factions. As I said, there is 2 communist factions, 1 Islamic Jihad faction, Al-Qaeda. It's a bunch of tribes and families. And they all eventually unite under the nihilistic idea of being against, and in this case, it will be being against the Jews. Obviously, in a world where the Jews are destroyed and killed and gone, they will just move on to fight themselves and destroy themselves, as we see in other countries in the Arab world that hold similar ideas. So when we look at societies and political movements and people and idea, we need to take this in account. It's a very important thing to explicitly identify.
And with that, we'll be back tomorrow with another episode of the Daily Objective and the reality show. In the meantime, you can check out the links in the description and follow the stuff we've talked about today. Thank you guys for joining me today. Thank you everybody for watching, and bye-bye.
Thank you.